Right as the tow truck yanked Mom's van, on her chemo day, no less, the peppermint-scented HOA flyer slipped from my glove. Name's Henry, 58, ex-carpenter, currently clutching a faded veteran's parking placard like it's a crucifix. Ever had your patience snapped in public daylight, with your past and future packed in one van? What would you have done? Henry adjusted the last clip on his front porch, a vintage string of Christmas lights swaying gently in the Ohio breeze. His late wife always said the holidays began the moment that string lit up. The air smelled faintly of chimney smoke and the remnants of fallen leaves, and Henry, standing on the step stool with a slight tremble in his knees, wiped his hands on his denim apron. He glanced at the bulletin board pinned to the shared mailbox post. HOA notices were stacked in plastic sleeves, the typeface shrinking each year. One caught his eye: no exterior holiday decorations before December 15th. It was printed in red. He muttered under his breath, sure wasn't like this when Margaret was around, and reached to tighten a bulb that blinked weakly at the end of the string. The neighborhood, Maplewood Crossing, was quiet this morning, only the soft rustling of bare branches and the occasional bark from a yard down the street. Everyone here knew each other, or at least used to. Lately, things felt tighter. More cautious. Earlier that day, Henry had met Rebecca at Betty's diner. She had flown in for Thanksgiving, dragging Eli behind her. Henry didn't need to ask how long they'd be staying, he could read it in the way she ordered coffee, with her phone never quite leaving her palm. Still, the smile she gave when the waitress brought out pecan bars felt real. "Hon," the woman said to Henry with a wink, "I saved you the last slice." Locals murmured around them, a couple from Chestnut Lane whispering about new letters from the HOA, about curfews and fence inspections. Henry let it wash over him. He focused on Rebecca's face, on how Eli kept adjusting his GoPro strap while sipping a hot chocolate too fast. Back at the house, Henry pulled the box labeled "Holiday" from the garage shelf. Dust puffed into the air, catching sunlight like it was made of memory. Inside were the things he touched once a year but never stopped thinking about: the red velvet ribbon Margaret tied on the mailbox, the tiny ceramic deer with a chipped ear, and the archway star she had insisted was just the right size. He hadn't planned to put them up. Not really. But once he started, the rhythm returned. Eli followed him with the GoPro. "What was Grandma's favorite ornament?" the boy asked, panning over the tangled lights and weathered decorations. Henry paused, smiled softly. "She liked the bird. The blue one. Said it reminded her of home." Where was home? Wherever we were together. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the front yard. Henry climbed down from the porch ladder, wiped his forehead, and turned toward the sidewalk just in time to see Deborah Klein walking past. Clipboard in hand, jacket zipped to the neck, eyes sharp behind rectangular glasses. She didn't smile. She didn't stop. But she did glance at the lights, then at her clipboard. A scratch of pen on paper. Henry nodded stiffly, but she said nothing. Still, her silence echoed. That evening, the house glowed faintly in the early dark. Henry stood on the curb, arms crossed, looking up at the archway star. It flickered once, then steadied. He remembered Margaret holding it up in the hardware store 3 decades ago, laughing at how it sparkled. He hadn't changed the bulb since. Inside, Perry Como's voice floated through the living room, "There's no place like home for the holidays." Henry hummed along, his baritone soft and gravelly. Eli sat on the couch, playing back his footage. The next morning brought frost on the lawn and a thin pink slip in the mailbox. Henry's hand trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Notice of violation, it read in bold. Holiday decorations displayed prematurely. Remove immediately or face a fine of $250. Rebecca appeared behind him, arms folded. She had seen it, too. She didn't speak at first. Then, with a sigh, she pulled out her phone and said, "We should probably talk about what you want to do next, Dad." "Just lights, Henry," Deborah huffed, waving her HOA binder. "You think that's what this community needs, rebellion?" Henry stood on his porch with his arms loosely crossed, the binder's plastic sheen catching the morning light like a challenge. The air smelled faintly of impending snow, and behind Deborah, flurries drifted lazily toward the ground, dusting the sidewalk with a polite suggestion of winter. He didn't answer right away. From the attic window above, Eli was crouched silently, filming through a pane speckled with frost. Across the yard, the wooden reindeer near the maple tree winked with a mismatched twinkle, one bulb still flickering from yesterday's repair. Rebecca had awoken to a memory alert on her phone. Facebook, ever timely, had surfaced an old photo. Her mother stood beside Henry 10 years ago, arms tangled in a light string, both laughing as if they'd never stop. She stared at it longer than she meant to, thumb hovering over share, but then locked her phone and slipped it into her coat pocket. Later that morning, she visited May Riggins, the neighbor down the block with the front step crumbling under age and charm. May poured tea into a mismatched cup and told stories like they were secrets. Deborah fined me for daffodils, she said, chuckling without humor. Said they weren't HOA approved. Imagine that, a war on spring. Rebecca blinked. That's insane. Oh, honey, May said, patting her hand. It's been insane since Deborah got that gavel. Henry, meanwhile, had taken to the backyard fence, replacing cracked bulbs and humming softly. The string of lights there hadn't been lit since Margaret passed. He stepped carefully, favoring his left knee, his breath clouding the air. The star on the archway glowed steadily now, flanked by the warm colors of freshly wired bulbs, old stock from the basement, salvaged and shining again. A box appeared on the porch that afternoon. Inside, antique ornaments, hand-painted glass bells, and a note, "Thought you might want these, Ruth, Lot 7. That night, 2 more boxes followed. One had a ceramic snowman missing a button, the other, a tangle of tinsel wrapped in a child's drawing. Rebecca watched quietly as her father lifted each piece with reverence. Over at Betty's diner, peppermint pie had joined the chalkboard menu. The town's Thanksgiving parade after-party was underway, low-key and familiar, with Mrs. Greer's ukulele trio playing holiday standards near the coat rack. Rebecca sipped cider and exchanged greetings with old friends she hadn't seen since her wedding. One mentioned Henry's lights. Another leaned in and whispered, "We'd been waiting for someone to push back." Mr. Donnelly, the retired mayor, appeared without announcement that evening, standing just inside the front gate like a statue from another time. He tipped his hat and gave Henry a nod but said nothing. Just stood a while, watching the lights flicker into being. Eli's time-lapse camera clicked rhythmically in the attic, capturing snow, sunlight, and soft resistance. He scribbled a label on the memory card, "The Bright Rebellion." By Sunday night, Henry had added garland to the porch rail, careful to leave space for the mailbox. Rebecca returned from town to find him in mid-climb, adjusting a string above the window. They didn't speak much, there wasn't need. The house was beginning to look like it once had. On Monday morning, a new notice greeted them. This one was different. It wasn't tucked politely in the mailbox or slid beneath the door. It was stapled, directly to the porch railing. The paper flapped like a warning flag in the wind. Second violation, it blared. Failure to comply. HOA sanctions pending. The staple marks were deep, careless. Rebecca stared at it, her mouth tight. She looked at her father. "I think it's time we show them what these lights really mean." The night lit up before sunset, not just Henry's porch but the edges of 5 neighboring houses. Quiet protest. Warm glow. Henry stood on his lawn with hands in his coat pockets, the soft buzz of old wiring humming like a distant lullaby. Porch posts wrapped in red and white spirals blinked rhythmically, casting a festive shimmer onto the frost-covered sidewalk. Across the street, Mr. Donnelly's front hedge flickered to life, revealing plastic snowmen half buried in a decade's worth of mulch. The air smelled faintly of chimney smoke and gingerbread. Inside the attic, Eli repositioned his tripod. Through the wide dormer window, his GoPro caught Henry helping Frank Malone plug in a string of dusty candy canes lining the driveway. "These haven't lit up since '95, Frank said with a chuckle, thumping the transformer with the flat of his hand. A flash, a whir, and suddenly the candy canes glowed a soft pink. Rebecca watched from the porch, arms crossed against the cold, a stack of printed flyers tucked under one arm. Holiday Lighting Unity, Thursday night at 7, the title read in bold script. She had spent the afternoon formatting it on her old laptop while sipping hot cider at Betty's. Carol and June had offered to help distribute them during the cookie swap. The community spirit was stirring. Frank handed Henry a thermos of coffee. "Don't ask what's in it," he muttered, then winked. The two stood in comfortable silence as the lights steadied. Henry nodded. "Good work, partner." Frank shrugged. "Just glad the old girl still sparks." Behind them, Carol and June's cottage twinkled faintly with multicolored icicles along the eaves. A reindeer's head poked out from the bushes, as if peeking around for permission. Rebecca stepped down the porch steps and crossed to Carol's. The sisters were wrestling with an extension cord, giggling like teenagers. "Think we're being too loud?" June asked. "Loud's not the problem," Rebecca replied. "It's bright they're worried about." She handed over a flyer. "Let's make sure Thursday is unforgettable." Deborah Klein, on the other hand, was anything but festive. Her neatly rolled HOA newsletters had gone undelivered that morning. A neighbor found 3 of them tossed in the gutter near the town bulletin board, now partly obscured by overlapping bake sale announcements, lost pet alerts, and a rather cheeky flyer promoting Maplewood's Loudest Lights contest, judged by Santa himself. That evening, Henry's lights flickered unexpectedly. The porch dimmed, then came back alive with a hesitant pulse. "Breaker's old," he muttered. Frank, already halfway across the lawn with a worn toolbox, raised an eyebrow. "Let's get her a new heart." Together, they knelt beside the side panel. Henry held the flashlight, Frank rewired a fuse. Rebecca hovered, arms crossed, then disappeared inside and returned with ginger snaps from Carol. "Bribe," she offered. Frank accepted with a grin, eyes twinkling. Upstairs, Eli labeled his project folder, "The Bright Rebellion." A thumbnail preview showed a time-lapse of snow falling over Henry's front yard as light crept from one house to the next. Better than TikTok, he murmured to himself. By midweek, more porches glimmered. Subtle. Measured. Intentional. A ceramic cardinal. A glistening wreath. One neighbor added a set of antique sleigh bells to her gate and claimed she'd forgotten they made noise. Another lent Henry an old blow-mold Santa that required its own outlet. "Use it while it works," she said. "Like the rest of us." That morning, Henry opened his mailbox expecting holiday cards. Instead, he pulled out an envelope stamped with the HOA seal. Inside was a single-page letter printed in black ink, bolded in parts, pending HOA disciplinary hearing. Possible suspension of voting rights. He read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and slid it into the inner pocket of his coat. Rebecca found him in the garage. He was standing over a tangled mess of extension cords, not moving. "I know," she said softly. He didn't look up. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "They wanted quiet. We'll give them a symphony of light." By the time the church bells rang 7, porches flickered on, one by one, the block lit up like memory lane. Henry tugged his scarf tighter, the chill biting at his neck as he stepped back to admire the glow. A light dusting of snow had begun to settle, softening the outlines of mailboxes, porch swings, and bundled bushes. The red bows he'd tied earlier in the day fluttered slightly in the wind, one on every post, just as he'd promised himself. It wasn't defiance, exactly. It was memory, painted in warm colors and quiet gestures. The letter from the HOA still sat folded on the kitchen table, its language sharp enough to slice butter. Pending disciplinary action. Removal advised. Repeated violations may result in further community penalties. He hadn't shown it to Rebecca yet. He knew what she'd say. Something passionate. Something that might make her feel like a teenager again, stomping off to right some wrong. But Henry didn't need fire. He needed steadiness. Throughout the day, he'd climbed a short ladder with Eli holding it steady, adjusting flickering bulbs on the eaves and replacing cracked glass on the old reindeer display Margaret had loved. His back ached, but the ache wasn't unpleasant, it was earned. Eli handed him a headlamp at one point with a grin. So you can see the truth when they try to blind you with paperwork. Across the street, Carol and June were out early with a thermos and paper cups, refilling neighbors who passed by with peppermint cocoa. The gazebo in the town square had already begun filling with wreaths, some classic, some quirky, one made entirely of old bicycle bells. Henry caught sight of the woman who made it, giggling with her daughter as they adjusted its crooked ribbon. Rebecca spent most of the afternoon walking house to house with a stack of hand-folded invitations. Neighbors only lighting, Thursday, 7 p.m. You know what for? That last line was her addition, scrawled in bold ink under the printed words. People didn't ask many questions. They just nodded. Some smiled, others pressed her hand before taking the flyer. Mr. Donnelly didn't say much, as usual. But he stood quietly at the edge of Henry's lawn before sunset, sipping from a flask he kept in his coat. When Henry nodded at him, he raised the flask in a kind of salute and turned back toward his house without a word. That meant something, Henry thought. As the sky purpled and temperatures dipped, front doors began creaking open. People stepped outside in mismatched mittens and fleece-lined hats, brushing off snow as they made final adjustments to their displays. Lights blinked on, first the Atwood house, then the Riggses 2 doors down. Then the Malones. Then the empty cottage across from Betty's diner where someone, no one knew who, had strung simple white bulbs along the railing. Henry stood on his porch in a sweater he hadn't worn since 1998, the one Margaret had stitched herself. Merry and bright, it read in faded embroidery. The knit was stretched now, the red dulled, but it wrapped around him like the arms of an old friend. The block shimmered. Multicolored icicles danced above windows. Inflatable snowmen bounced slightly in the breeze. Spotlights turned hedges into frozen sculptures. Carol's radio crackled from an open window, Bing Crosby crooning across driveways. Then came the flash of high beams. Deborah's SUV crept slowly down the street, her silhouette framed by the dashboard glow. The car paused in front of each house. A phone glinted in her hand, she was taking photos. The window lowered. Her voice, muffled but agitated, burst into the night, "It's a coordinated attack on regulation." Her SUV jerked forward, stopping again at Henry's gate. She stared at him, phone to her ear, words rising in pitch. Whatever response she got on the other end wasn't fast enough. Her arm waved as if she were trying to conduct a traffic stop in the middle of her own meltdown. Henry looked to Rebecca, who had just stepped onto the porch with a mug of cider. She followed his gaze, then caught Deborah's rant. Her brows lifted in amused disbelief. Henry said lightly, "Funny, isn't it? How light travels faster than her fury." The mailbox didn't creak, it screamed, as Henry pulled out an envelope stamped "Formal Citation, Repeat Offense." The wind tugged at his coat as he stood at the curb, staring at the red-inked stamp like it might vanish if he blinked hard enough. The envelope felt heavier than it should, as if burdened by something more than the HOA's threats, like the weight of quiet memories and decades of habits suddenly made criminal. Inside, over his second cup of coffee, Henry opened it without ceremony. Rebecca and Eli watched from the kitchen. The notice was harsher this time: remove all decorations by Sunday or face legal action, including court fees and community penalty assessments. It was signed by Deborah in her signature purple ink, 2 loops under her name. "Not even a happy holidays," he murmured, folding it once, then again, slipping it into the drawer beside the spoons. Eli tapped at his phone. "That video of you helping Mrs. Brenner with her candy canes? It's blowing up. People are tagging their uncles and posting heart emojis." Rebecca chuckled. "You're a seasonal rebel now." Henry only smiled faintly and returned to replacing a bulb near the porch's right beam. But inside, something settled. Not anger. Not fear. Something closer to resolve. That morning at Betty's, the usual hush of coffee and pastries was punctuated by soft gossip. "Did you hear Deborah tried to yank down May's lights?" someone whispered over cinnamon buns. The waitress pinned a grainy photo of Henry standing beside the community tree onto the bulletin board, scrawling "Spirit of Maplewood" in red marker beneath it. In the pharmacy line, someone tapped Rebecca's shoulder. Your dad's lights, they remind me of my parents' porch in '78. Don't let them bully him. She smiled, touched, and nodded without words. Deborah, meanwhile, had turned crusader. She ripped down the garlands from Mrs. May's railing, her coat sleeves flapping like a judge's robe. Someone across the street recorded it all. That clip, too, made its way online, titled HOA President Has Public Tantrum Over Garland. Comments poured in, shameful. Isn't this harassment? Give that man a medal. Eli, ever the documentarian, wore a sweatshirt he'd printed himself, Maplewood Lights Back, its typeface reminiscent of vintage Christmas postcards. He filmed Henry hanging a wooden placard above the porch step, hand-painted letters reading, "This house shines in memory and meaning." Later that afternoon, Rebecca met with a local attorney at the municipal office. They spoke quietly about federal guidelines, seasonal rights, and whether an HOA could truly regulate festivity down to the day. The answer, it seemed, wasn't as clear-cut as Deborah's notices made it appear. As the cold sun dipped behind skeletal trees, neighbors began to stop by with offerings, hot chocolate in thermoses, paper plates of thumbprint cookies, one even with a folded lawn gnome that twinkled when plugged in. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Their presence spoke for them. Mr. Donnelly left a letter in the mailbox later that evening. Its envelope was hand-addressed. Inside, a single line, "Let the town speak." And it did. In laughter echoing from porch to porch, in the creak of extension cords unfurling from garages, in silent nods exchanged across driveways. Then came the knock. Henry opened the door. Deborah stood there, tight-lipped and flushed from the cold. "Enjoy your lights while you can. We're coming Monday." HOA's special committee arrived with clipboards, cameras, and silence colder than the frost on Henry's railing. They moved in formation, 3 people, 2 phones recording, 1 heavy binder between them. Not a nod. Not a smile. Just boots clicking up the steps of the community center as the snow fell like powdered sugar on the sidewalk. Inside, the folding chairs had long since filled. Maplewood Crossing didn't see crowds like this often, maybe for parades, maybe for high school graduations. But today, it was about porch lights. Henry sat with his hands clasped on his lap, a knit scarf Margaret had once made tucked under his coat. May was beside him, small but upright. Rebecca adjusted the laptop on the AV cart. Eli wore his Maplewood Lights Back sweatshirt again, camera at the ready. At the front, Deborah stood tall in a dark blazer, flanked by the committee members. Her voice sliced through the quiet. "We are convened to review a continued breach of Section 4B, Seasonal Exterior Illumination. The violation began November 30th and remains active as of this morning." She flipped the binder open dramatically, revealing photos of Henry's porch from multiple angles, morning, dusk, even midnight. Henry raised an eyebrow. He hadn't realized someone had been out that late. Or that often. Before Deborah could continue, the door creaked open again. Mr. Donnelly stepped in, nodded at Henry, and made his way to the back of the room. He leaned toward Rebecca and whispered, "If they want a hearing, give them an audience." Rebecca stood. Her voice was clear, calm. "Before this council makes a decision, I'd like to present context, both visual and personal." The projector flicked on. First, the video of Deborah tearing down May's decorations, her face tight with fury, her coat snagged on a railing. There were gasps. Next came a collage of testimonials, short clips from Carol, from Frank, from June, each recalling winters gone, lights shared, children's laughter, Margaret's cookies. Each voice a note in a quiet chorus. Then Eli played the time-lapse, the first light on Henry's porch, slowly joined by neighbors, one by one, until the whole street was ablaze in soft color. The final frame lingered on the sign, "This house shines in memory and meaning." Henry stood only when the video ended. He didn't speak right away. When he did, it was without anger, only steadiness. "I've lived in Maplewood since '81. Fixed more outlets than I can count. Taught 3 kids how to change a fuse. And every December, my wife and I strung those lights together. She passed 5 years ago. I keep them up because they remind me I still have something worth remembering. No one clapped. No one had to. The silence was full enough. Deborah shifted uncomfortably. Her expression flickered, indignation tangled with uncertainty. Then May, 84 and unapologetically floral, stood and raised her hand. I was fined once for planting daffodils too close to the sidewalk. Didn't stop me. You know why? Because joy doesn't grow inside rulebooks. Frank grunted in agreement. Half of those rules weren't even in the original charter. Carol offered, we could put a star on every house if it means we remember what matters. A murmur of support moved through the crowd. At the front, one of the HOA members, a bespectacled man in a tan windbreaker, cleared his throat. Motion to dismiss charges. This is not the spirit we want representing us. Deborah's mouth opened. Closed. Her nostrils flared, but she said nothing. Instead, she packed her binder, tucked her phone under her arm, and walked out. But just before the doors swung closed, those near the back heard her whisper, sharp and cold, then we'll do it my way. Afterward, May poured Henry a cup of coffee from the lobby urn. You didn't need to win, she said, pressing the styrofoam into his hands. You just needed to be right. Carol pinned silver stars on everyone's lapel as they left. And an old woman, no one was quite sure who she came with, pressed a small wrapped box into Henry's palm. Margaret would be proud, she said, then disappeared into the snow. At 5:13 p.m., just as dusk kissed the rooftops, the entire block went dark, except for Henry's porch. The hum of his old generator broke the sudden silence. His porch glowed in golden defiance, every bulb shimmering against the pale blue of twilight. Eli, sitting cross-legged by the living room window, stared wide-eyed at the blacked-out houses stretching into the gloom. He reached for his GoPro and whispered, "They really did it." Rebecca dropped the box of cinnamon sticks she was tying into wreaths. Her phone buzzed again, messages piling in, power's out. Henry's the only one lit. Coincidence? A chill ran down her spine, and it wasn't from the wind leaking through the kitchen doorframe. May Riggins shuffled up the porch steps, bundled in layers and clutching a thermos. "Henry, dear," she said, "my oven stopped mid-garlic roast. I followed the only light left in town." Henry, in his old army parka and fleece-lined boots, opened the screen door. "You're always welcome," he said simply, motioning her inside. In the darkened street, silhouettes gathered. Flashlights blinked. One family brought a camping lantern, another carried battery-powered tea lights in mason jars. Children giggled as their breath fogged in the cold, and soon, people began making their way toward the warm beacon at the Atwood home. From the attic, Eli's live stream had started. His commentary was soft, reverent. "Maplewood Crossing," he said, "looks like a Norman Rockwell painting with the lights off. Except Grandpa Henry's porch, it's practically a lighthouse." Inside, Henry turned the old radio dial until he found Bing Crosby. "I'll be home for Christmas," crackled to life, as the front yard became a gathering point. Carol handed out gingerbread cookies shaped like stars. Frank passed around thick blankets from his truck. One neighbor, eyes wet, said softly, "We just wanted to celebrate without fear." Meanwhile, Rebecca's phone vibrated again, this time, a blocked number. She hesitated, then opened the message. It was a screenshot. An email chain. Subject line, "Electrical concerns, Maplewood." The message, plain as daylight, read, "Advise temporary disconnect for compliance audit. Initiated request for Henry Atwood Sector. DK." "Deborah," Rebecca murmured. She showed the screen to Henry, who nodded grimly. "Didn't think she'd sink this low," he said. He stepped out into the crowd forming around his porch and raised his voice gently, "Folks, seems someone wanted to dim the whole street, except they forgot we don't go out easy." Cheers rippled through the assembly. Someone passed hot cocoa to Rebecca. A small boy held up a paper lantern and whispered, "This feels like a parade." A chorus of laughter followed. The townspeople stayed. Some sat on Henry's steps. Others leaned against the railing wrapped in vintage tinsel. May found herself humming along with Bing. Across the way, a few more porches flickered to life, battery lights strung hastily but bravely. Suddenly, Eli's live stream numbers shot up. A local news page had reshared it. Comments flooded in. Then, a ripple of gasps as a black SUV rolled up and parked in the street's center. A tall man in a wool coat stepped out, shoes crunching against the frostbitten pavement. He approached slowly, scanning the glowing porch, the small crowd, the visible emotion. He paused at the foot of the steps and raised his badge just enough for Rebecca and Henry to see. "Miss Klein," he called toward the street, not loudly, but with unmistakable authority. "I'm with the state attorney's office." Snow fell in fine threads, drifting through the lamplight onto the quiet cul-de-sac of Maplewood Crossing. Christmas Eve had returned like an old friend, not with a bang but a hush, a soft blanket of peace resting gently over a town that had once bristled with quiet rebellion. Every home on the block now shimmered with light, not in protest, but in shared understanding. Henry adjusted the last bulb on the porch, a dull, gold-tinged ornament shaped like a tear. He held it in gloved hands for a moment before reaching up and hooking it onto the wooden beam. The filament sparked to life. Faint, warm. The same bulb from 1974. The same one Margaret had tucked into the bottom of their first Christmas box when they'd bought the house. He exhaled, not from fatigue, but release. From across the yard, Rebecca carried a clipboard and a folded letter. "It's from the city," she said. "They want to name the block after you. Maplewood Lights Way." Henry chuckled. "Tell them to name it after everyone. After May, Frank, June, the whole street. This wasn't just mine to fight." She smiled, then unfolded another paper. Her voice softened. "This one's from Deborah. It's an apology. She resigned. Says she's moving in with her sister in Indiana. Wants people to know, she got it wrong." Henry nodded, not unkindly. "That's something." Out front, the street had transformed. Folding tables lined the curb, blanketed in red gingham and filled with dishes, casseroles, peppermint bark, roasted pecans, hot cider. A pot of chili steamed beside a tray of gingerbread men missing buttons. Laughter crackled like old records. Someone started singing off-key, and someone else joined in without shame. Carol had brought her cassette player again. Bing Crosby filled the air like perfume. Eli wandered among the crowd, his camera rig balanced on his shoulder. He moved slowly, capturing the scene in sweeping shots: snow on pine branches, glowing reindeer cutouts, Mrs. May kissing a gingerbread man before biting its head off. "Lights of Maplewood," his YouTube channel read across the strap of his backpack. Below that, "Every light tells a story." Behind the tables, Rebecca had erected a wooden board, painted white and ringed in holly. Across the top, she'd stenciled, "The light lives on." On it were photos from decades past, neighbors long gone, some children now grown with kids of their own. Henry and Margaret in matching mittens. May planting daffodils. Even a blurry snapshot of the porch's first string of lights, barely clinging to the gutter. Henry stood back and watched. It had been a long season. He had been ready to lose. Ready to be fined, cited, dragged to some dim community office and lectured on decorum. But instead, the lights had brought them back, to each other. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the final letter. Margaret's handwriting was still steady, still looping in places it didn't need to loop. It was dated Christmas Eve, 12 years ago. "If you're reading this," she had written, "you kept the lights up. Good. Keep the porch lit, Henry. Not for me, but for the next ones. So they'll know which way to come home." He folded it quietly, eyes misting, and slipped it back into the envelope. A soft crunch of tires on snow drew his gaze. A minivan had pulled to the curb across the street. A young family climbed out, a man and woman, a bundled child between them. They paused, staring at the glowing houses. The little girl pointed toward Henry's porch. "Is this where the lights started?" she asked. Rebecca crouched beside her. It is, she said, smiling. And they haven't stopped since. Henry stepped down from the porch, his old knees cracking like kindling. You folks just moving in? He asked. The man nodded. Yeah. Closing was yesterday. Realtor said the power was back. We didn't expect, he waved at the scene in front of him. You hungry? Henry said. We've got chili, cider, and probably more cookies than the law allows. The girl clutched her stuffed bear and looked up at her father. Can we stay? Henry reached for a pair of extra mugs sitting on the porch rail. Welcome home, he said. A squirrel darted up the nearby maple, ran along the string of lights toward the roofline. Henry chuckled. Margaret used to say that little guy was the guardian of the roof. He turned back toward the crowd as more laughter bubbled into the night. The light, steady and golden, poured out onto the street and beyond, like a promise. And behind it all, the porch stayed lit. Just as she'd asked. On that quiet Christmas Eve, Maplewood wasn't just lit by bulbs, but by stories, memories, and a community reborn. What started as one man's quiet stand against unfairness became a chorus of porch lights speaking louder than rules ever could. When power is misused, it dims the soul of a neighborhood, but when neighbors stand together, they become the power that lasts. So maybe it's never too late to hang one more light, for justice, for kindness, for those still finding their way home.